Okay, welcome back, everyone, to our next session today. Before I introduce our presenters today, I just want to remind you we do have a chat and a Q&A function. Feel free to type your questions in there. You can type your questions either anonymously in the Q&A and just send them to the presenters and to the host, myself, if you want to keep your questions and yourself anonymous. Or if you do want to use the chat function, you can post to all attendees or um, uh, to all participants. All participants goes to the presenters as well. All attendees just goes to the to those who are registered, to those who are watching. But do know that if you do post, it will specify your name, so you won't be anonymous if you use the chat to all participants or all attendees. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Um, we have McKeely Shannon, who is the high school program manager for Forward Montana Foundation, and Terry Bradley, development manager for Forward Montana. We welcome you both today. Thanks so much for your time and look forward to your presentation. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Paul. Terry, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'll unmute you, Terry.
Oh gosh, thank you so much, Paul.
You're all set.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today for Spilling the Tea, Transforming Identity and Passion into Social Change. As Paul said and introduced us, and you know our names, but you may be wondering, who are these majestic strangers before you on your screen? And we can go to the next slide. I am Terry Bradley. My pronouns are he, him, his. As mentioned, I'm the development manager at Forward Montana Foundation. I am A'aninin, or White Clay, or Grovont, however you pronounce it, from the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. And I graduated from MSU back in 2018 with a degree in elementary education with a science option. And I'll let my co-presenter introduce herself.
Well, thank you, Terry. My name is McKeely Shannon. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the high school program manager at Forward Montana Foundation. This is a newer position that I started in January, and this is the first time that anyone has managed this position full time. So I've just really hit the ground running. I've been excited to be on board with amazing staff at Forward Montana Foundation. And I graduated last May with a community health bachelor's degree, and have just been loving nonprofit life ever since. So, you know, just loving Forward Montana. And then we're just going to kind of go to a little bit of an overview to just let everybody know what we're going to be going through today, give you a little bit of a roadmap, just give you a sense of what we're going to be going over. So here is that. Harry, do you want to go over your sections and just give an overview?
Yeah, so at the beginning, we're just going to do a short, quick little intro activity. Then we're going to move into exploration of identity and then how that identity really informs leadership. And then I'll toss it over to McKeely for the rest of it.
And then we will talk about leadership best practices. So just kind of the best practices for being a leader and what that looks like. If there is something that looks like even. So just vulnerability. We're going to talk about vulnerability. So get buckled in for that. And then we're going to have some reflection to end on and leave some room open for questions, anything that's coming up for anyone at the end. And I will turn it back over to the lovely Terry.
Yeah, we also just, because we just mentioned questions, we totally encourage people to ask questions, make us go back to a specific slide, whatever you want. The more questions, quite honestly, the more we can make sure that you learn something. We don't want to take your time here today and you leave not learning anything. So please, please, please ask a question whenever you want. We're more than happy. We'd rather do this presentation and talk with you rather than at you. But with that, we're going to move into our first little activity. And our intro activity today is Hope and Fear, and it's usually called Hope and Fear in a Hat. But anyway, so on a piece of paper, in your notes, whatever you want, you're going to answer the following question on the next slide, and you'll have about 45 seconds to do so. And after that time is up, I'll give you about 15 seconds to read over what you wrote. And if you even get done earlier than that, just keep rereading it. This is the time to reflect and kind of recognize the question that we're actually asking and the answer that you're actually giving us. And if you're brave enough, you can submit your answer in the chat. I only ask that people do not comment or respond to other people's submissions. We're not here to critique or comment on those. These are just people's answers. And so our first question is going to be on the topic of fear. So given this is the last day of the summit and we only have a few presentations left throughout the day, what is one thing you fear you won't learn? Whether it's within this presentation or a different presentation, and kind of really think about what you're looking for, what questions you have, and what's something that you might not get answered this time around. And I'll just give you 45 seconds, which is starting now. And it's going to be a real awkward silence, and that's okay. We can honor silence. So I'm going to give you 45 seconds to write down your answer. Again, if you're brave enough, you can add it into our chat. But your time has started. So that's been 45 seconds. So I'm going to give you 15 seconds to just reread what you wrote. If you get it done before that time is done, just keep rereading it. And then we'll go on to round 2. Alrighty, 15 seconds goes by so quickly. And now we're going to go to round 2. And just to review the rules, again, on a piece of paper, in your notes on your phone, if you want to do it mentally, whatever you want. You have 45 seconds and then 15 seconds to review. And so our next question is on hope. What is one thing you hope to learn from this presentation? Yeah, and your time starts now. Okay, and then you can take the next 15 seconds or so to review your answer on what is one thing you hope to learn from this presentation. All righty. 15 seconds is up. Now, so you may be asking, Terry, why did we just spend the last 2 minutes in what was pretty much utter silence? Well, for these exact reasons. In the next slide. Awesome. So, quite honestly, the interactivity was just a chance for us to reflect and recognize the various reasons about why we're here, why we attended this conference, this summit, and why we are here at this presentation specifically, and then recognizing that all are valid. And then all of this to get us to start thinking in the right mindset about our identity and how it influences us as leaders in social change. And so, yeah, and with that, before we can start sipping the tea, we first must brew the tea. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to jump into identity if we want to go to the next slide. So many universities, research organizations, and businesses, and many other systems recognize these identities as the Big Ten. And if you're lucky enough to attend MSU in Bozeman, I highly recommend joining Sustained Dialogue because that's where I learned about a lot of these things. And it's a student group where they discuss and learn and dialogue about these Big Ten identities. And with the ones in the red or the ones that are underlined or have the little star next to them, those were recently added in 2018. And we want to recognize that it's not saying that you can't have other identities. That's like your hair color, or some people really identify with the native language that they speak, along with like a secondary language that they may speak. Like I really identify with my really, really long hair now that it is more grown out, because it is culturally significant to me. And these identities are mostly chosen given their emphasis in politics, in society, education, and really everyday life. And they influence how we see the world and, quite honestly, how others see us. And with identity, next slide. With identity, with understanding identity means understanding intersectionality. So, what is this big fancy long word? Now, originally, intersectionality was a theory that came from Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989. And this term was dimed from her to try and explain how she was being discriminated against and oppressed because she was both Black and a woman. She really couldn't, there was no language to tell about how you could be discriminated against for two different things that intersect. And she dimed this term. And now intersectionality and the idea behind it have expanded to show the interaction and the overlapping of experiences and various aspects of your identity, such as the Big Ten, as you see here. And to make it a little bit easier to think about, we can think about it in two different ways. And the first one is intrapersonal, so the diversity within oneself. So, for example, we look at the person here who identifies as a female, politically affiliated with Democrat, happens to be an atheist, and right now is 23 years old. And where all of those prevalent identities overlap is oneself or herself. And that's how you can think of it as really diversity within yourself and those identities, how they overlap and interact. Another way to think about intersectionality is interpersonal, or the diversity between two different people. And essentially, this is just saying that different people from different backgrounds can find themselves to have similar identities or similar experiences and backgrounds. So, for example, a 45-year-old Black male and a 23-year-old atheist female, looking at them separately, you wouldn't really identify them to have any similar experiences or backgrounds or identities. But because in our modern day society, they both have two very different identities that are kind of targeted and oppressed. Him being a Black man and her being a female. And so they happen to find themselves identifying politically as Democrats. And that's not to say the case for everyone, but these are just examples. And with that, what does it mean? Why do we care? Why is diversity important? Why is it relevant today? Well, here's why. Diversity means so many different things, but it also means that we get to have creativity, that we get to have innovation and things like resiliency. And we also get to have like challenges and competition. I mean, can you imagine how life would be if everyone thought the same way, if everyone experienced the same thing? We wouldn't have literally anything. We'd have no new technology or ways of thinking, philosophy, all of it. And with that, recognizing and understanding and honoring, quite honestly, honoring diversity better prepares you to do things like offer more effective solutions, ability to adopt and execute innovative ideas, and things like even approaching problems with multiple perspectives and increasing better communication and comprehension. So overall, and this goes from like if you're doing a study group, if you're on a volleyball team, if you're doing an independent project for the end of the semester, if you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar industry business, all of these things, if you recognize diversity and integrate diversity into what you're doing, you just have a better product outcome. Everything is better. And so, all in all, recognizing identity and honoring diversity means this. It means knowing what you bring to the table and that offering opportunities to be the best leader you can be, and quite honestly, informs your passions, interests, hopes, dreams, what you put your time and experience into. Yeah, and so with that, now that we've efficiently brewed the tea, I'm going to hand it over and we can look at how you can apply that knowledge of self and that knowledge of diversity to be an effective leader to McKeel's.
Thank you, Terry. And I've effectively brewed my cup of tea myself. So I brought it here with me. So yes, so as Terry said, now that we've brewed our tea, we're going to start sipping our tea, which basically just means we all have vastly different experiences that guide life and shape how we view the world and effectively how we lead from those experiences and from those lenses that Terry showed you with all those intersecting pieces that kind of guide us. This kind of modge podge of different experiences and things that we go through in life help us innovate and create and push for growth in ways that other people can't, and ways that other people can't even imagine because they don't have that kind of unique like overlap of things that they understand differently. And through all of these experiences that we kind of have in life, they guide the values that we have in our personal lives and our professional lives and just throughout like kind of our entire being. And so to kind of know ourselves and our values is kind of foundational for our lives and also for leadership. And so this first kind of question that comes up is, are there best practices for leadership? And I think one of the things that comes up when you think of best practices are, I mean, you can look it up, you can research it, and there's such a wide variety of thought processes and guides on this. And I think truly it comes down to a case by case and person by person. How do you like to be led? How do you want to feel inspired by another person? And kind of by those same things that you feel inspired by, I think you can kind of find like your own kind of unique brand of like leadership. And so these few like ones on the screen right now are some of mine. And so I think for me, integrity is a really, really, really big one, because I think that honesty, and not just honesty, but saying things that are congruent with your actions and following through on those things, builds trust. And I think that that's really important for me, like having people who supervise me, who lead me through life, is they have my trust, and also is something that when I lead others that I want to cultivate and build with them as well. And that kind of goes into safe container, which is kind of the same thing, but it's also building a space, and not meaning safe as in there's a guarantee. There's no guarantee of safety in these places. No other person can guarantee safety for another, because as Terry said, we all have wildly different experiences. And so what is safe for one person is not safe for another. But it is saying, I will show up for you. And if you need me to sit with something that's uncomfortable, if you need me to listen to you and hold space for you and, be there for you, I can do that. And I can do that for you. So that's what a safe container is. And then curiosity. I think this is my favorite one personally. Curiosity is kind of acknowledging that you have a gap somewhere in your knowledge, and it is then taking action to bridge that gap. So for instance, you don't know how to knit. You don't know how to knit, so you ask your friend who does. And so you can bridge, kind of what that looks like with your friend, and bridge that gap of knitting. And so I think that these are the three really, really big ones for me. But really quickly, I would like for around 30 seconds for people to type in the chat, kind of one or two of your biggest leadership practice you want to embody as a leader, or that you want a leader or a manager or a supervisor or someone who leads you in that way to kind of interact with you and be present with you. So we will take the next 30 seconds if you would all like to start typing those in the chat.
And Terry and I can keep an eye on those, so we'll let you know, McKeely. Again, maybe you could just restate what it is you wanted folks to type into the chat. And I see one
Most definitely.
come up.
If you all would just type in any best practices that you want to embody, or that you want another leader in your life to embody with you or with others, and just overall what you think makes the best leaders.
Great, and I see a few that have come up. These were sent to all attendees, so Terry, I don't think you're able to see these. Somebody has said, listen to understand, not respond. And another comment is leadership with vulnerability.
Oof.
Q&A,
Yeah.
we have empathy.
Those are all wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things.
Just came
and I'm
up,
really, really glad.
open
Go ahead.
communication, good and bad. and joy, transparency, and eye towards transforming systems. And again, I'll just remind our attendees, if you want our panelists to read your comments, send your comments to all participants. So those are all the comments that I think that have come up so far.
They're all super, super wonderful things. And I'm glad that people are talking about vision, empathy, joy. And I think that these are things that we typically don't contribute maybe to leadership, but I think that they're important things because we don't just lead really even in the workplace. You know, like there's other parts of our life that we lead in. And so that kind of goes over to when do we show up as leaders? Do we decide? Do we show up as leaders in our professional lives and our personal lives? Is there an in-between place? And I think that this is something where when I was talking about values, and we all have these values that have been shaped by our experiences, and they guide us throughout our life. You know, they get us into our profession, they guide our lives on a personal level. And I'm just kind of wondering, what are some of the values that, you know, just one, and I would love again for you to put in the chat, that guide you in both your personal and your professional life, that are the intermediate place between those two aspects of your life. Because I know for me personally, I'm a very justice-oriented person. And so my life on a personal level is very oriented towards that, on what I read and what I listen to, but also my professional life and what career I have chosen and what pathway I've chosen. So if you all want to reflect on that for the next minute, and then at the end of that minute, just kind of share it in the chat. And again, we can just kind of be quiet for a minute and just take that time for ourselves to kind of reflect. It looks like we have a couple more seconds left. And Paul, could you help me out again and just read out any of the ones that are in the chat or in the Q&A for me?
Sure. This was from the previous slide, and the previous question of somebody posted, focus on the person, not a product. And I don't see any new chats coming up.
That is perfectly fine. I thought I saw a couple come up, but I think I saw some that just kind of talked about, and I mean, that's a great one as well. A person, not a product. So leading with humanity and people first kind of model is a lot of what I envision as well as a huge value of mine. And I think to show up in all aspects of our lives and to lead in all, to lead in our lives, it takes great vulnerability and discomfort at times, because we really have to share those experiences in the open. And I don't mean disclosing things that you're not comfortable with, but I think that it means being comfortable enough with yourself to show up and to say the hard things. And so you all mentioned empathy and vulnerability, and vulnerability is the root of courageous leadership. It's uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, which I don't know about any of you. It is not, none of those things are comfortable. None of those things are easy to sit with. And yet it is the thing, just like Terry said, diversity in leadership creates innovation. It creates, new ideas that have never happened before. It creates growth. And that's because vulnerability is also at the root of that, because those people are honest about who they are, how they show up, how they present themselves. And a lot of great leaders in the past have had multiple identities that they have had to be vulnerable with and have to have had led from. And so I think that, vulnerability, we can't really control people's responses to different perspectives. It may challenge some, it may comfort some. Yet there's resiliency inside of all of us to be so deeply rooted inside ourselves that no matter what ebbs and flows outside, whether that's opinions or making hard decisions and having to face the responsibilities of that, it won't shake us, because I think being deeply rooted in our vulnerability and who we are and those different pieces of diversity can really make us stronger, truly, which seems like the opposite, because it seems like when you expose yourself that you're making yourself weak, but truly it creates more connection with others, and that is another great upside of vulnerability and leadership, is that connective piece to other people, and leading them from your own experiences. And I know that vulnerability is kind of an abstract concept, and not the word itself and not vulnerability itself, but leading from it. Like, how do you lean into vulnerability and then lead from it? And so I've put some of these things up here, these 3 guidelines that I've chosen, very similar to some of Brene Brown's work, and some of the things that she gives as guidelines for leading with vulnerability. But these are not an end-all be-all for leaning into vulnerability within leadership. And I know some of these things are kind of a little bit abstract again. So I'm just going to kind of go into what these things are. So rumbling with vulnerability. Rumbling with vulnerability is basically practicing vulnerability. So deciding, I'm going to show up. This might be hard, but I'm deciding to show up. Staying curious. So one of those things I mentioned before. And generous in assumptions. So being generous and giving people the benefit of the doubt in those assumptions as well. And then also sticking with the messiness. So realizing some things that you're not going to always have comfortable conversations, that there might be conflict, that people are not going to agree with you, that sometimes being yourself is not going to sit well with other people, or the way that you lead is not going to sit well with other people, and that there's going to be messiness, and that there's going to be, a little bit of not the best feeling. It's going to be icky. It's going to be super, super icky. And then living into our values. So again, those values that guide us throughout all aspects of our lives and how those interplay into our personal, our professional lives, into our leadership roles. And what is a value? It's a way of being or something that we value as most important. And so living into our values means that we are doing more than just professing them. We're not just professing them and saying, I believe in these things. These are things that I stand by. It is actually taking action to stick by those values. So if you believe in vulnerability, it's being uncomfortable sometimes. It's being, okay with, or at least deciding to show up as your full self, even when it's hard. And then the last one here is braving trust, which again is one of those ones that's a little bit abstract. But again, it's just being brave, deciding to show up, and learning that trust is built upon the layering and stacking of small moments over time, and that vulnerability and trust cannot exist without each other. And if you break trust, then somebody cannot be vulnerable with you. So going back to that safe containership of, as a leader, making sure that people feel comfortable enough to be brave with you, to sit in a place with you that is not at all comfortable sometimes, and just realizing that you can do that together, that you can have hard conversations, and that you can learn from one another. And those are three super, super big concepts. And there's so many more to being vulnerable as a leader. But I think that these are the three that really, really stand out to me and go back to the values that I feel uphold leadership. And then we're done sipping. I don't know about you all, but my cup is empty. My tea is gone. I need to brew some more. Sorry, oh my gosh, we're done. No, so leading with vulnerability is not easy. It's not something that I will ever profess as easy. Yet, now more than ever, what our world needs right now is leaders with a diverse range of experiences and perspectives to change the script on what has been done before. Yeah, I would say let's not do that. And that's leading with vulnerability. That's leaning into these uncomfortable conversations, and sitting inside of stuff, whether that's within our own value system, whether that's within other people's, but still deciding to show up and still deciding to be yourself. And I mean, okay, bye now. In your high schools, clubs, sports, families, communities, to create change that is enduring. I mean, we really can't do it without young people. That's why my job. I show up as the high school program manager every single day. And why I love Forward Montana so much is just because it's about young people. It's about people with diverse experiences leading the charge on changing the script, on being compassionate and empathetic with people, and leading people before product. It's those very things that you all professed as values and best practices and things that you hold dear in your lives. So going on next, we're just going to kind of take a minute to reflect. We're going to probably take the next 5 minutes, half minutes per question. And I just really want you all to reflect on what is one thing you will use as a leader in your community, whether that's a church community, a school community, a club community, a sports community, anything that you feel community that you want to lead in. And then what is one thing that you can bring to leadership that others cannot? What things overlap into all those diverse experiences that intersect, make up you, and what is that one thing that you can bring to leadership that nobody else can. So if you all want to take the next 2 minutes to answer the first one, and then type your responses into the chat, and then I will check back in with you about the second one in around 2 minutes.
Great. And McKeely, there's been a comment on the previous slide. Somebody just said, for me, it fosters permission for others to share their whole selves as well. Vulnerability is scary and needed. So just thought I'd share that with you.
Most definitely. And I'm going to leave you alone in silence for a little bit, but most definitely. And I think being vulnerable and giving other people permission to be themselves, even if they're different from you, is a really, really amazing skill to have, and also a wonderful piece of permission to have from other people, as well, because sometimes you need somebody else to display those characteristics to learn from it. Okay, and it looks like we're at the end of the 2 minutes for that first question. So I'm just going to reread the second question and then ask you, chat. So just what do you think you can bring to leadership that others cannot? So how those pieces of, that you're diverse in, intersect to kind of create your unique identity, and kind of how you can bring different things to leadership than maybe others can. Like we're at the end of those 2 minutes for that second question. And if any of you want to share, please do in the chat. If these are things that are more personal to you and that you just kind of want to keep and reflect for yourself, that is perfectly fine as well. But if anyone wants to share, that would be awesome.
McKeels, I don't see anyone submitting yet anyway, but I wanted to maybe answer these while we wait or as time suffices. But
I love it.
yeah, the one thing I love that you brought up, and when we were making this presentation, was braving trust. And I know for me, I have a really hard time like trusting people to either like get something done or achieve a task, or if I have an ask for them to do something. Um, that's something that is really hard for me to do. And I just really love the language of braving it, like literally trusting in trust, and being brave enough to trust someone in something, um, was huge for me. So it's definitely something I will start thinking about and using, as a leader within my personal community and within my professional capacity. Um, and then one thing that I can bring to leadership that others cannot. This was kind of harder for me to think about, but um, I think I'm like very analytical about access to certain events or certain efforts, and how can we make it as accessible as possible, because certain identities of my own were denied access to a lot of different systems and a lot of different things. And so, um, yeah, I think that's what I can bring as a leader, is thinking about access and who we want to be at certain places and how do we get them there. Um, yeah. And then I see Morgan said that I hope I can learn to listen better as a leader and to be brave enough to hear about things that are going poorly. I think I bring a unique array of passions as a leader.
Those are so wonderful. So absolutely wonderful. And thank you so much, Terry, for sharing. I think that for one, I think you brought up a really, really great point that braving trust is trusting trust. It's taking the leap, and doing the thing before you're fully ready to. And I think that that is super, super hard to propel yourself to do that at times. I'm going to go to our very last slide with our friend Baby Yoda, who is sipping his tea. I'm actually not sure if it's tea. I watched The Mandalorian. I'm not sure if it's like a stew, but I'm going to say it's tea. If anyone has any questions, and I would love to hear it. I'm sure Terry would as well.
Definitely. Oh, we had Melissa submit another answer. Still thinking about question 1, but question 2, they say, I bring imperfections, I make mistakes, I screw things up, and that's okay. I work hard to demonstrate in my work with youth, nothing has to be perfect. It always has a chance to learn and grow. Oh, it's always a chance to learn and grow. I love that.
I love that as well. I think, and Terry, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And Melissa, I hear you as a recovering perfectionist. I really, really struggle because I'm the type of person, and this is, if I have to improve as one thing as a leader, and one thing that I want to improve on is I want everything to be perfect. So sometimes I don't start. If I know I'm not going to be good at a sport, like sometimes I'm just like, might as well not do it. And so I think that the thing to sometimes bring back into it is the fun aspect of it, the play part of it, like that childhood aspect of things don't have to be perfect. Like sometimes you just have to do them, and have fun while you're doing them. And they don't have to look a certain way, or look, super polished or how you imagine mind, because truly, some of the greatest pieces of art, some of the greatest movements of our time, the people who did those things look back and are like, I could have done that better. And there is no going back. You do something and you do it with the things the resources that you have at the time, most of the time. So
Definitely. Yeah. And I am definitely a perfectionist, even like when we were making this presentation. I'm ridiculous about it. And I think Melissa brought up a good point. It was like it should always be a chance to learn and grow. And I start to think about instead of asking if the product or the presentation or whatever I'm working on, rather than asking is if it's perfect, I try to ask is is what I'm doing right now productive? Like, am I still learning from it? Am I still growing? Is it productive in my time and my energy? And that's usually when I know to shut it down, is when I can't answer um, yes to is it productive to keep doing what I'm doing. And that has helped me a bunch in not staying up very late or um, not leave, or even like you said, or not putting stuff off um, because of that fear of not being perfect. And so now now just start asking yourself, is it productive rather than perfect? Um,
And we have just a couple more minutes left before we have to wrap things up. Yeah, I do see a couple more comments. Terry, if you wanted to read those.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, we only have a few minutes left. I hear you, McKeely. I was the same way for a long time. I've learned from leaders who don't admit mistakes. That is where I want to be. That's not where I want to be. It's a permission thing for me again. If we come as ourselves, it will be it will be perfect because it is who we are. We are messy, weird, and flawed, and that is so beautiful. And then they also said, "I love that perspective, Terry. Thank you." Oh,
Well, yes to all of those things. Completely and totally preach. Love that. That's the soapbox that I want to be on. Yeah, I think that all of those different experiences that we all have kind of layer into how we respond as leaders as well, and are things that we all can learn from, and not treat opportunities in places that we can just tweak as we kind of grow in our professions, in our style, those sorts of things. So, yeah.
Well, great. We have just another minute left. If you want to provide any closing comments, and then we'll wrap this session up.
We really want to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you sipping on some tea, brewing some tea, spilling it all over the place. We really, really, love talking about this sort of thing. We love talking about, you know, developing, ourselves as young leaders, and also just on a broader spectrum for others. And also just love talking about, I've learned so much from Terry through this process about intersectionality and diversity and how that encourages so many like innovative, creative things in the world that really cannot exist without it. And so, yeah, shout out to Terry as well.
and same to Keely. She has taught me so much, um, even in the few months that she's been a part of the team. And yeah, just highly encourage anyone to reach out to us, contact us. We're happy to continue this conversation. Maybe even brew a whole nother pot of tea if we need to. But yeah, with that, we'll give you some time to transition and jump into the next session.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for that great information and the great comments, of course, from our attendees. Um, we will just take a minute for a break here before we transition to our next session. I'll invite you all to stay logged on. No need to log off. We will just take a quick pause and we'll be back with our next session. Thanks again for staying with us, and we will be right back. Hang tight.